He wrenched her wrists behind her back and pinned her down with his full 240-pound frame, slamming her face into the mat with a sound like a gun cocking. "I warned you," she said through the blood. "I'm a Marine Corps combat instructor." 48 Navy SEALs had her surrounded in a circle. Her German Shepherd was held fast at the edge of the mat, baring its teeth and trembling because she had ordered it to stay put. Bishop Kane bore down with all his weight on her back and told her to say it again. She said it again. 5 seconds later, he was flat on his back with his own wrist twisted backward in her grip, and the only sound in the building was a 240-pound man struggling to breathe. "Anyone else want to finish the punchline?" No one moved. If you want to know what that woman and her service dog did to this unit over the next 21 days, and why 4 careers ended because of it, subscribe now and watch to the end. And leave a comment letting me know which city you're watching from. I want to know exactly how far this story has traveled. The joke started 48 hours before she ever set foot on the island. It happened in the operations briefing at Cold Weather Special Warfare Detachment, Kodiak, on a Sunday evening in February, in a room that smelled like burnt coffee and wet neoprene. Somebody read the incoming personnel line off the tablet: civilian close quarters consultant, 3-week contract, arriving Tuesday, female K9 attached. And there was a pause about 2 seconds long while 48 men decided together without discussing it what that meant. Then somebody laughed. Nobody could ever say afterward who went first. That was the thing about laughter in a room like that. It never had an author. It just arrived, and once it arrived, everyone got to be a participant instead of a decision maker. And that difference was going to matter more in the coming 3 weeks than any single man in that room could have imagined. The laugh spread the way water spreads on a flat surface. Easy, fast, filling every low place. Nobody asked why a civilian consultant would be authorized a working dog. Nobody asked why a 3-week contract needed Secretary of the Navy routing on the arrival packet, or why the routing block on the second page had been redacted down to a gray bar. 2 men actually noticed that gray bar. Both of them decided it was an administrative error because the alternative required a kind of thinking that nobody in that room was in the mood to do on a Sunday night. Senior Chief Petty Officer Bishop Kane didn't laugh. He didn't need to. He sat at the end of the second row with his forearms on the table and let the laughter happen around him, the way a man lets weather happen. And when it died down, he said one sentence in a flat, unhurried voice. 3 weeks is a long time to be wrong about somebody. The men who heard it took it as a joke about her. Every single one of them. It was not a joke about her. She came off the morning ferry at Bo 545 into a wind that came sideways off the water with ice in it, and the duty petty officer at the entry desk looked up and made the same 3 calculations everyone made in the first 4 seconds. Too young, too small, too ordinary. He was right about all 3 in exactly the way that was going to cost this command everything it had spent 14 months protecting. She was 25, dark honey blonde hair pulled back into a ponytail that had a little wave left in it where it hadn't been fully tamed, a few strands loose at the temples from the wind. She wore an olive green deep-neck sports bra that fit the way gear fits on somebody who uses their body for a living, in military camouflage pants, bloused into standard boots. No rank, no name tape, no badge clipped anywhere. Nothing on her that told a single person in that building who she was. And at her left knee, moving in a perfect heel without a word or a hand signal, was the dog. He was a full-grown German Shepherd, big through the chest, that tan gold and black coat with the black saddle running clean across his back and the mask dark across his muzzle. His tactical harness had one thing embroidered on the left panel stitched in black thread that had gone slightly gray from Salt Titan Tizo 6. The duty petty officer had been on this island 11 months and had never once seen a working dog come off that ferry that didn't pull, didn't scan, didn't do anything but walk. Titan walked. His head stayed level with her thigh. His eyes moved, and nothing else did. "Ma'am, I need you to sign the visitor log." She took the pen with her left hand and signed it. E. Rourke, Contract Instructor CQC K9. Every letter of that name was a lie except the shape of it. "Kennel's on the north side," he said. "I can have somebody walk your dog over. He stays with me. Ma'am, regulations for contract animals." "He stays with me," she said again in exactly the same tone at exactly the same volume. And the strange thing, the thing the duty petty officer would think about for a long time afterward, was that it didn't sound like an argument. It sounded like a weather report, like something already decided somewhere far above both of them. He let it go. He didn't know why he let it go. He was still trying to figure that out at 0700 when the shouting started on the training floor. She was on the mat by 0602 doing her equipment check, and Bishop Kane was already there. I was 33 years old and 240 pounds. 5 combat deployments, more decorations than anyone else currently attached to this command, and he was the gravitational center that 47 other men arranged themselves around without ever being told to. He hadn't gotten that by being cruel. That was the part outsiders always got wrong. He'd gotten it by being right about weather, right about ice, right about which man was going to break and when right, often enough and loudly enough that being right had eventually stopped requiring evidence. He watched her cross the floor. He did the assessment he did on everyone fast and complete, and he priced her out in under 4 seconds the way he'd been pricing people out for a decade. Then the dog turned his head and looked at him. Titan didn't growl, didn't stiffen, didn't do a single thing that would show up on a report. He just turned his head and put his eyes on Bishop Kane and held them there for 3 full seconds, and Kane felt something move up the back of his neck that he had not felt in a training facility in 11 years. He didn't like the feeling, so he did what men like Kane always do with a feeling they don't like. He turned to the group behind him and said something low, and they laughed. She heard it. She didn't look up. She finished checking the mat seams, then she put her hand flat on the top of Titan's head for exactly 1 second and took it away, and the dog's eyes came off Kane and went to the floor. She had just told him not yet. Nobody in that building spoke dog well enough to know what they'd watched. The block started at 0600 sharp, 48 candidates in formation breath, fogging in a room that never got fully warm because the heat exchangers on this island had been failing since November, and the requisition had been sitting on a chief warrant officer's desk since December. The lead training officer read the introduction off a card in the flat monotone of a man reading a requirement he hadn't written and didn't believe in. Ellie Rourke, civilian contractor, 3-week close quarters consultation K9 attached. Extend professional courtesy. The formation received it the way formations receive information they have already processed on their own. Practiced neutrality, faces doing nothing at all. But she stood at the center of that mat and read 48 men in under a minute, the same way she'd been reading rooms since she was 19 years old, and what she saw was not indifference. What she saw was a room that had already voted. She let the silence run 4 seconds longer than was comfortable. Then she spoke, and her voice came out low and level and carried exactly as far as it needed to carry, and not 1 inch further. My name is Ellie Rourke. I'm here for 21 days. In those 21 days, I'm going to teach you what works after your comms are down, your air is grounded, your extract is 40 minutes out, and the only thing standing between your team and a terminal outcome are your body, your training, and your decisions under pressure. She paused. Some of you have a question about whether I'm qualified to do that. Good. Hold on to it. You'll have your answer inside the hour. Somewhere in the third row, a 23-year-old petty officer named Micah Dean felt his stomach drop because he had been in this building 8 months, and he had learned exactly one reliable rule about it. Nobody who talked like that ever survived the first morning. Kane stepped forward out of formation. He didn't break it, not technically, but he moved half a pace, and half a pace from Bishop Kane in that building was a declaration. Rourke, he said the name the way a man tests ice with his heel. Before we start, what's your background? Because these men just came off a winter rotation. Real water, real cold, real casualties. What exactly do you bring to that table? Behind her Titan's ears came forward 1 degree. She didn't turn around. She didn't have to. She had been listening to that dog's body for 4 years the way other people listen to a radio. She looked at Kane the way you look at something you've been studying from a very long distance and are finally seeing up close, and what was in her face wasn't hostility and wasn't nerves. It was the flat, complete attention of somebody taking a final measurement before they start cutting. That's a fair question, she said. Come to the center of the mat and I'll answer it. Kane smiled. It was the smile of a man who had already written the last line of the scene in his head. Dosan. He walked out easy, unhurried, 240 pounds, moving with the relaxed confidence of somebody who had not lost a physical confrontation since he was 21 years old. Rules, none, she said. That's the point. She turned her head about 10 degrees toward the dog and said one word quiet, almost conversational. Tighten, Platz. The shepherd went down onto the mat edge in a single motion and did not move again. Later, much later, when this was all in a JAG transcript and 4 careers were finished and the whole island was under investigation authority, 31 separate men would independently identify that one word as the moment they should have understood what was standing in front of them. Because a dog like that doesn't go down when a stranger threatens his handler. A dog like that goes down when he has been told hundreds of times in situations far worse than this one that his handler does not need him yet. None of them understood it at 0611 on a Tuesday morning. They understood it about 90 seconds later. Kane came fast. No telegraph, no setup, no shift of weight to announce it. He was on her before the sound of his first step finished, one hand fisted in the ponytail, the other locked on the collar of her sports bra, and he drove her face first into the mat with everything he had behind it. It was not a technique. It was not a demonstration. It was the specific application of maximum force by a man who wanted a statement made that could not be argued with afterward. And every single person in that room recognized it as such in the same instant. Her lips split against the mat surface. The impact went through the floor and up into the bleachers, and 48 men flinched at once, sharp and involuntary, a collective physical reaction that nobody chose and nobody could have stopped. Then nothing. The silence that came after had a very particular quality to it. It was the silence of people who have just watched something cross a line they all recognized, and none of them had been prepared to name out loud, and who are now individually calculating what it costs to be the first one to say so. Nobody said anything. Titan did not move. His body had gone rigid from the shoulders back, every muscle in him loaded, and a low sound started somewhere deep in his chest and stopped. Cut off, swallowed. He held the down, because she had told him to. Micah Dean, third row, 23 years old, would say under oath, 11 weeks later, that the thing that broke something open in him that morning was not the sound of her face hitting the mat. It was watching that dog choke down a growl and stay put, and understanding instantly with a clarity that made him feel sick that whatever was happening on that mat, she had planned for it. Then she moved, one palm flat, then the other. Her body came up off the mat with a steadiness that seemed to exist entirely outside the physics of what had just been done to her face. She got to one knee, then both feet, then all the way upright, spine straight, shoulders back, blood running off her lip in a thin, unbroken line down onto the front of the olive green fabric. She reached up and wiped her mouth with the back of her hand and looked at what came away the way you look at a piece of information you're filing for later. Kane was still standing where he'd finished, chest high, waiting for the outcome he had scripted. The outcome did not come. She turned and looked at him and said it quietly enough that only he could hear it. I warned you. Thank you for making this easy. The smile didn't fall right away. It took 2 full seconds. 2 seconds while his brain processed the gap between the reaction he had ordered and the reaction he had received, and then something shifted behind his eyes. Not fear, not understanding, not yet. Just the first hairline crack in a certainty that had been load-bearing for 11 years. You want to explain what that means? Not yet. She turned to the formation. Her voice came up to carrying volume and did not shake anywhere in it. Senior Chief Kane just demonstrated the single most common failure in real close quarters engagements. Superior mass applied before the situation has been read. She turned back to him. You assumed I would go down and stay down. That assumption is the kind that gets your team killed. Kane's jaw set. Nice theory. You're the one who hit the mat. I am, she touched her lip. And you're the one who doesn't know who he just hit. The room changed. It was the specific electric shift that happens when 48 people simultaneously understand that they are not watching what they thought they were watching. Come again, she said. Full contact. Show them what 5 deployments looks like. I just did. You showed them the first move. She set her feet. Show them what comes after it. He came again, and this time it was a takedown real 1-level change, driving low with his weight behind it. It had worked on every training partner he'd faced in 2 years on this island. She wasn't there. Half a step right. His momentum carried him through empty air, and her hand came down on the back of his neck. Not hard, not dramatic, just placed and used his own drive to angle him into the mat. He went in sideways, rolled, came up fast, turned. She was standing exactly where she'd been standing, not breathing hard, not in a defensive posture, just standing there with that same flat measuring look and blood still on her chin. Again, he attacked 4 more times. 4 more times he ended up on the floor, and none of it was spectacular. And that was the part that got into people. There was nothing to admire. There was nothing to cheer. It was precise and it was economical, and it looked like watching somebody solve equations that they had solved several thousand times before. Every response came in from a different angle. Everyone used a different principle. Not one of them required strength that outmatched his, because strength was not the thing she was using. And about halfway through the third one, Bishop Kane understood that with the total clarity of a man discovering that the language he has been shouting in his whole life is not the language being spoken. After the fourth, he stayed down a beat, not from damage, from something else, from the specific vertigo of a man encountering at 33 years old, a type of competence he had not known existed. 48 people had walked into that room certain about exactly one thing. They were now certain about nothing. He got up. His face had gone past red and arrived somewhere harder and considerably less readable. "What are you?" The question came out stripped of every ounce of the authority it had been carrying 20 minutes earlier. She reached into her cargo pocket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper and held it out. He took it, unfolded it, read. 47 men watched Bishop Kane's face change, and not one of them could fully interpret what they were seeing. What they saw was certainty leaving a human being. What the paper said was this: Kovar Elizar, Captain, United States Marine Corps. Martial arts instructor, trainer, combat master designation, youngest female recipient in Corps history, K9 Titan TZO 6 assigned, current duty Special Evaluation Authority CWSWD Kodiak, authorized SecNav Direct. Kane looked up from the page. She was watching him with the same expression she'd had since 0545, the one with nothing in it that looked like apprehension. The one that had known from the second she walked through that door precisely what the next 21 days were going to demand of her. "You had orders," he said. His voice had gone quiet. "Covert evaluation orders." "I did. And the contractor cover." "Necessary." I was silent for a moment. She could see the calculation running behind his eyes, the rapid panicked geometry of a man trying to establish the dimensions of the thing he is standing inside. How long? At 21 days, starting 18 minutes ago. She glanced once at the formation, then back at him. "You just gave me everything I needed for the first report. I'd strongly recommend the next 20 days go differently." He looked at the paper again, then at the formation, 47 men who had heard the question and heard the answer, and were now watching him decide what to do with information that had no good options anywhere inside it. He folded it and held it back out. She didn't take it. "Keep it," she said. "Read it again tonight. Then go through every decision you have made in this building in the last 14 months and ask yourself how many of them you'd want read out loud in a room like this one." She turned to the formation. 10-minute break. When we come back, we start day 1. She let that sit. "Anyone who does not want to be here can request reassignment right now. No record, no consequence. Just walk." She waited. Nobody walks. Nobody walked. But the room came apart into noise and movement, the way rooms do after something nobody has processed yet. And in that noise, a lot of things happened that she cataloged and said nothing about. Chief Warrant Officer Doyle Ferraro, 41 years old, administrative, who had not been scheduled to be anywhere near the training floor that morning, was standing at the back doorway with his tablet against his chest. He had been there since 0608. He had watched the entire thing without moving and without changing expression. And when Kane read the paper, Ferraro's thumb moved once across his screen, and he turned and walked out. But he was not walking fast. That was the detail she filed. A man walking fast is reacting. A man walking at exactly his normal pace after watching that is executing. Senior Chief Wade Mercer went out after him about 90 seconds later, and Mercer was walking fast. And Petty Officer Second Class Nora Beltran, 24, the only woman in the current intake 6 months on this island, with something behind her eyes that had gone very quiet a long time ago, stayed exactly where she was standing in formation for 11 seconds after the dismissal, looking at the blood on the mat, and then walked out without speaking to anyone. Elise saw all three. She wrote none of them down where anyone could see her do it. She crouched at the mat edge and put both hands on either side of Titan's face and let him press his forehead into her sternum, and she felt the tremor still running through him, the one he'd been holding since the impact. "I know," she said very low. "I know, buddy, I know." The dog leaned his whole weight into her, and for about 4 seconds, the only 4 seconds of that entire morning, the pressure went out of her shoulders. Then she stood up and got back to work. Dean came to her at the equipment wall with a water bottle he didn't need. "Ma'am," his voice had that careful quality of a young man trying not to be caught doing something. "Are you is your face? It's a split lip." "Yes, ma'am." He shifted. "Can I say something out of line?" "Go ahead." "You let him." She looked at him properly for the first time. Micah Dean, 23, 174 pounds, a SWAM time that had improved 14% in the last quarter. A personnel file with the word hesitant in it 3 separate times in the same handwriting. "Say the rest of it," she said. He'd have done it anyway, sooner or later, to somebody. Dean's jaw worked. "But you made it be today, in front of everybody, on camera." His eyes came up. "I've been here 8 months, ma'am, and I've watched that man do things nobody could ever prove afterward, because it's always one guy alone with him, and afterward, it's just one guy's word. And this morning it was 48. Elise held his gaze for a long moment. "Documentation tells people what happened," she said. "Witnessing it tells them who somebody is. Those are not the same thing, and the second one is the only one that changes a building." Dean swallowed hard. "He's going to come after you now. He's going to try. He's not going to be the one that matters." She capped the water bottle and handed it back to him. "Petty officer, what's your first instinct in a compromised swimmer scenario? Objective or man?" "Man." He said it fast. Then his face did something complicated. "Which is the problem, apparently?" "Who told you that was a problem?" Dean didn't answer. He didn't have to. She already had it in a personnel file in the same handwriting 3 times. "That word in your evils," she said. "Hesitant. Somebody put that on you because you check your team before you press. He calls that hesitation. I call it judgment. There's a difference, and the entire question of what kind of operator you turn into over the next 10 years comes down to which one of us you decide to believe." She walked away and left him standing there, and she did not look back because he needed the next 90 seconds to himself, and she knew it. Ferraro found her at 40 in the quarter outside the equipment cage. He was alone, which told her the lawyers hadn't been called yet, which told her he was still operating on instinct, always the most revealing version of a man. Captain Kovar. He used the real name, deliberately making a point of how fast he'd gotten it. "I want to raise a concern early rather than late." "Raise it." What happened this morning was a violent assault on a commissioned officer of the United States Marine Corps. His voice was reasonable, warm even. "That's an Article 128 exposure for Senior Chief Kane at minimum. Career ending, possibly custodial." "That's correct." "It's also entirely preventable." He tilted his head slightly. "You were operating under a false identity. He had no way of knowing. There's a legitimate argument that the deception created the conditions for the offense, and I think if the two of you sat down—" "Chief Warrant Officer?" She stopped walking. "Say the last part of that sentence out loud." Ferraro's expression did not change. "I'm not sure what you were about to offer to make an assault charge disappear in exchange for something, and you were going to do it in a corridor with no witnesses. 4 hours after I identified myself to a Marine Corps captain holding SECNAV evaluation authority." She let it sit. "Sir, I have to ask, how many times has that worked?" Something went across his face then. Very brief. Gone almost before it arrived. "You've been in this building 6 hours, he said. "You don't know what's here." "No," she agreed, "but I know what isn't. There's a locker in the North Passage with a nameplate still on it. Core D, it's been secured with a padlock for 8 months. She watched him. "Personal effects go home in 30 days. That's not a policy, that's a regulation. So either somebody forgot for 8 months on an island with 106 people on it." She stopped. Ferraro said nothing at all. "Or somebody didn't want that locker opened," she finished. "Have a good afternoon, sir." She walked. She did not walk fast. Titan came off her left knee without a command and matched her stride, and she could feel Ferraro standing back, there watching them go, and she made herself keep the exact same pace all the way to the corner. Because a woman who speeds up is a woman who is afraid, and there was not going to be one single frame of footage on this island of her being afraid. Besides, that night the wind came up to 51 knots and the ferry canceled Wednesday's run, which meant nobody was leaving this island for at least 72 hours. She read the weather advisory twice and felt something in her chest settle rather than tighten. Good, she thought. Then nobody's leaving. At 21:40, Captain Vivian Sorensen's message came through on the secure line. 3 procedural inquiries hit my desk in the last 4 hours. Legality of the cover identity definition of entrapment. Whether a covert evaluator can also be a complaining witness. All 3 are well drafted. All 3 came from different sources. Somebody coached them. They are faster than I expected. Watch your 6. She read it, filed it, and went back to building her day 2 scenario. And she was still working at 23:12 when Titan lifted his head off his paws and looked at the door. I didn't bark. He didn't rise. He just looked, and the low sound started in his chest, the same one he'd swallowed on the mat. 9 seconds later, she heard the footstep in the passage outside. By the time she opened the door, there was nobody there. Just the wind and the cold and a single sheet of paper folded once on the deck plate. Typed, unsigned, 6 words. Nobody is coming to get you. She stood there in the doorway with the wind coming down the passage and read it twice, and then she did what she had done with every threat since she was 19 years old. She photographed it. She bagged it. She labeled it with date, time, and location, and she added it to the file. Then she got her flashlight and she walked the North Passage. The locker was where it had been that morning. Core D, the nameplate still seated, the padlock still through the hasp. 8 months of salt, already starting to work on the shackle. She crouched in front of it and put her light on the seam. And Titan, who had been at her knee, walked forward past her, put his nose against the vent slots at the bottom of that locker door and lay down. Flat, front paws out, chin on the deck, the alert position. Elise's hand stopped moving. She had partnered that dog for 4 years. He had gone down like that in a warehouse in Djibouti, twice in Camp Pendleton's training runs, and once in a vehicle checkpoint in a country she was not allowed to name, and every single time, without exception, there had been something inside that he had been trained to find. Not drugs, not explosives. She had cross-trained him herself on her own time for 2 years, on the one thing she had promised at 19 years old she would never walk past again. Titan. Her voice came out lower than she meant it to. Show me. The dog didn't move. He didn't need to. He'd already shown her. She put her hand flat on the locker door and felt the cold come up through her palm and thought about a 22-year-old corporal named Danny Core who had died in the water off this island 8 months ago, whose file said hypothermia, individual negligence, whose sister in Fresno had written 11 letters to this command and received not one reply. And she understood, crouched on a freezing deck plate at 23:40, with her hand on a dead man's locker, that she had not come to Kodiak to evaluate a training culture. She had come here to open that door. Part 2 Louis viết ổn định làm nền từ liên kết liền mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện tạo thành một câu chuyện liền mạch khi ghép lại. Mỗi phần liền mạch với phần trước không giới thiệu lại câu chuyện ở đầu phần mới. Liên kết các phần của câu chuyện một cách liên mạch. Sử dụng câu chuyện tiếp giữa các phần, duy trì chủ đề. Tránh ngắt quãng đột ngột, không sử dụng gạt ở đầu dòng hoặc tiêu đề phụ phong cách kể chuyện Mỹ Hoa Kỳ giống văn giàu cảm xúc chân thực và gần gũi, không mô tả cảnh, tập trung vào hành động, cảm xúc và tâm lý nhân vật. Thêm 6 đến 8 câu thoại trực tiếp ở các đinh viết phần 2 đạt điểm 10-10 và bổ sung tiết tấu câu chuyện nhanh, sửa lỗi AI kể theo ngôi thứ 3, tăng độ kịch tính, không Việt lan man, kết thúc phần không giới thiệu phần sau. Lưu ý trả lời trong mục tin nhắn không nhảy sang mục document mới. 2-3 phút cần có mini climax và đạt 10.15 mini climax mỗi. Phần cứ 10-12 phút có một twist lớn sâu sắc đan xen mini cliffhanger mạnh hơn. Thăng tính tự nhiên cho phản ứng của các nhân vật, thêm nhịp điệu, kịch tính thực tế và gần gũi. 18-10 phút cần có móc giữ chân khán giả. Lưu ý không mô tả cảnh. She didn't cut the padlock. That was the first decision she made after Titan went down at that vent. And it was the hardest one because everything in her wanted to put bolt cutters through that shackle at midnight and find out what was inside. She sat with the want for about 90 seconds, and then she killed it. Evidence taken outside of process was evidence somebody like Ferraro could argue away in 20 minutes. And she had already watched that man try to trade an assault charge in a hallway. Whatever was in that locker was going to be opened with a witness, a camera, and a chain of custody, or it was going to be opened by somebody else and used against her. So she photographed the padlock. She photographed the nameplate, the corrosion pattern on the hasp, the deck plate, the vent slots. She time-stamped every frame, and then she stood up, told Titan Fuss, and walked away from the one thing on that island she actually wanted. Walking away cost her more than getting driven into the Mad had. She was awake at 04:30, on the training floor at 05:12. When the candidates came through the door at 0600, she was already standing there, and she watched 48 men process her face, the lip, now visibly swollen, the bruise coming up dark along her jaw where the mat had caught her cheekbone. Some of them flinched. A few looked away with the specific discomfort of people who understand exactly what they watched the day before and have not yet decided what to do about it. Dean met her eyes. Beltran met her eyes and held them one beat longer than necessary, which for Beltran was a speech. Kane came in 30 seconds before the block started, took his position without looking at her, and did not speak. The paper she'd handed him was gone. She knew it before she checked, and she checked anyway in the way you confirm a thing you already know. It was gone because men like Kane don't keep evidence of their own vulnerability. They pass it to the people they trust, and they start building the answer before the shock has finished metabolizing. By 07:45, she knew exactly how fast they'd built it. Sorensen called on the secure line during the equipment rotation. Her voice had the flat, careful quality it got when the news was bad enough to need controlled delivery. They filed at 0631. Which one? Ferraro and Mercer jointly. Direct to the base commander, bypassing your evaluation chain entirely. 3 allegations: unauthorized investigation conducted under a false identity, entrapment of a senior enlisted member, and Sorensen paused. Reckless endangerment of personnel through deliberate provocation of a violent confrontation in a training environment. Elise let out a breath. They're saying I provoked him. They're saying you engineered it, that you knew what Kane would do, and you created the conditions so you'd have footage. A pause. Elise, the ugly part is that it isn't entirely wrong. No, Elise said, it isn't. Don't say that in a JAG room. I'll say it in a JAG room, Vivian, because it's true and because the second I start shading it, they own me. She watched the candidates cycling through the harness stations across the floor. I let him hit me, on purpose, in front of 48 witnesses and 3 cameras. I'd do it again this morning. The question a board has to answer isn't whether I let him. It's whether a man who slams a stranger's face into a mat because she didn't flinch is a man this command should have been protecting for 14 months. Sorensen was quiet for 2 seconds. There's one more thing, she said. The complaint was copied to a military press contact before it hit the commander's desk. Timestamps are 11 minutes apart. The copy went out first. And there it was. Not a defense, an offense. Get the story into the record before the evaluation could be completed. Flip the frame before the evidence existed. Turn the investigator into the story and the subjects of the investigation into the victims of it. It was a good play. It was a play built by somebody who had done it before. How much do they know about my documentation? They know it exists. They don't know the scope. Sorensen's voice dropped. Elise, the storm's shutting the island down Thursday night. 72 hours minimum, possibly 5 days. If they get that story to print while you're weathered in with no comms and no counsel, then they control the frame for 5 days and I come out of it already convicted. Yes. Elise looked out at the floor. Good, she said. Good. Nobody leaves this island for 5 days either, Captain. Not Ferraro, not Mercer, not one witness they might want to move somewhere inconvenient. She hung up on that. She had 4 days before the weather closed. She needed 3 things in those 4 days, and she was not going to get all 3. Day 2 was open water navigation in 4-meter swells. Water temperature at 3 degrees, and she'd restructured the entire block overnight so that it looked completely routine and functioned as a pressure test for exactly the things she needed to see. Team assignments went up at 0550. Kane's name appeared alongside Dean Beltran and a 21-year-old named Silas Boone. Kane saw the pairing and his expression didn't change, but the tendons in his neck did. He fell in beside her on the walk down to the boats. These look random. They're not. Boone's a liability in open water. His times improved 11% in the last 6 weeks. She didn't look at him. You haven't read his current evils. You read his first month evils, and you stopped. Kane took 2 more steps. You've read them. I've read everything available on every person in this intake, including yours. She stopped and turned to face him then, because she wanted him looking at her when she said it. Senior Chief, I'm going to tell you one thing once because I don't think you're stupid. What I saw yesterday morning was a man who leads through fear because he never had to develop anything else. That worked perfectly for 11 years as long as everyone around you was afraid. It stopped working at Bo 611 yesterday when somebody wasn't. You think you know me from one morning. I think you know you from one morning, she said. That's the part that's going to keep you up. She walked on. He didn't answer. She hadn't needed him to. Boat 3 hit trouble at the 40-minute mark. Silas Boone's harness buckle sheared in the trough of a set wave, a genuine equipment failure not scenario. The shackle pin going out of a piece of gear that a maintenance log said had been inspected 11 days earlier, and he went from secured to fighting for grip on the port rail with one hand, while the other worked a strap that wasn't going to hold. Kane's voice hit the radio inside 4 seconds. Flat. Professional. Command Kane. Man compromised portside. Do we abort the navigation objective or maintain course? Elise closed her eyes for exactly 1 second in the chase boat. Because that was it. That was the whole thing in one transmission on an open channel recorded on 3 separate systems. Not my man is in trouble. Not I need a rescue asset. Do we abort the objective? She keyed the mic. Kane, what is Boone's status? Harness failure partial, working it. Can he secure himself? A pause. Longer than it should have been. Long enough that she could hear him deciding what answer served him. Working it. Then work it with him, she said. That's your status. The objective waits. In Senior Chief, she let one beat go by. When a man on your boat is compromised, the first question is never about the mission. Not once. Not ever. That is the entire difference between a unit and a group of individuals who happen to be on the same hull. Static. Then clipped copy. She wrote it down, and then she watched the rest of it happen through binoculars, and what she saw made her put the pen down. Micah Dean moved before Kane finished the transmission. No order, no signal, no permission. He came across the deck in a swell that could have taken him off. It got a fist in Boone's harness, webbing, and pinned the kid bodily against the rail with his own weight while Boone worked the buckle with both hands free. He talked the whole time. She couldn't hear the words. She could see his mouth moving steady low, the same 3 or 4 syllables over and over, the way you talk to somebody who is 4 seconds from panic. Boone got the harness secured. The boat continued. Nobody mentioned it in the debrief. Dean didn't raise his hand, didn't ask for a mark on the record, didn't look at anyone. Elise mentioned it by name out loud in front of the whole formation. And she watched Kane's face while she did it, and what was on it was not anger. It was something worse for him. It was the look of a man doing arithmetic he has spent a decade refusing to do. She found Nora Beltran in the equipment room at 1620, stripping and reassembling a harness with the mechanical precision of somebody using physical work to stay ahead of a feeling. Elise sat down on the bench across from her and said nothing for a while. Beltran looked up. Ma'am? How long behind? Beltran understood the question instantly. Her hands kept working. 6 months? The comments, the isolation, the way certain people look at you in formation. Yes, ma'am. Her voice was flat, controlled the voice of somebody who had learned very thoroughly that emotion costs more than it returns. I filed 1 complaint in month 2. Nothing happened. Who talked you out of the second one? Beltran's hand stopped. 3 full seconds. Chief Warrant Officer Ferraro, she said. In the North Passage, he was very calm about it, very professional. He said that in a command, this small formal complaints have a way of following a person, and that I should think carefully about whether I wanted to spend the rest of my career being the woman who filed. She set the buckle down. He wasn't wrong about the practical outcome, ma'am. He was just wrong about whether that made it acceptable. Elise wrote the name down. The North Passage, she said. Where in the North Passage? By the lockers. Beltran's eyes came up. Why, Mom? Because there's a camera at the head of that corridor, and I need to know whether you were inside its arc. She kept her voice level. Petty officer, you're going to have to say all of that again on record in a formal setting with people in the room who will not want to hear it. I know exactly what that costs. I'm not going to pretend I don't. What does it get? A chance that it actually changes something. Elise held her gaze. That's all I can promise. A chance, but I'll be in the room when you say it, and I'll be in the room after. Beltran picked the harness back up. Her hands weren't steady anymore. There were others, she said, before me. I don't have names, but there was a woman who transferred out in September, and there's a guy who washed out in October, and I've always thought. She stopped. It doesn't matter what I think. It matters more than anything else in this building, Elise said. Think out loud. Beltran's jaw worked. I've always thought the ones who leave here don't leave because they can't do the job, she said. They leave because somebody made staying more expensive than quitting. That was the moment Elise stopped running an evaluation and started running an investigation, and she knew it while it was happening. She spent that night in the personnel database with Titan asleep against her boot, pulling every separation, transfer, and non-recommendation out of Kodiak going back 24 months, and by 2:30, she had a list of 19 names, and by 0410, she had a pattern. 14 of the 19 had one thing in common: a documented performance concern entered by a member of the same three-person cluster within 60 days of their departure. Kane Mercer Ferraro. Kane wrote the assessment, Mercer corroborated it, Ferraro processed it. 9 of those 14 had never had a single negative mark before that entry. 4 of them had filed something first. And one of them, the one she sat looking at until the numbers went blurry, was Core Daniel R. CPL USMC8. Deceased 14 June. Cause of death hypothermia, individual negligence contributory. Signed Prentice H. CDR MC USN. She pulled the incident report. Immersion time on the training log 11 minutes. Then she pulled the facility utilities record because generators on this island were metered by the hour and had been since 2019, and the pool house lighting circuit on the night of June 14th had drawn continuously for 49 minutes past the logged end of the block. 38 extra minutes in 3-degree water. She sat back very slowly. Somebody had put a 22-year-old in that water and left him there for 38 minutes past the point where a training log said everyone had gone home. And then somebody with an administrative billet had gone into a report and made 11 minutes out of 49. Elise put both hands flat on the desk and made herself breathe for a count of 6 because what was moving in her chest right then was not going to help her. And she knew exactly where it came from, and she had spent 6 years making sure it never got to drive. She was 19 the last time she'd let it drive, and she hadn't done anything at all. She made her first real mistake on day 3, and she made it because she was in a hurry, and she was in a hurry because of the weather. His name was Isaac Mwangi, 26. Quiet, precise, 5 months on the island, and according to the duty roster, he had been the assistant safety swimmer for the June 14th block. He was on the deck that night. He had to have been. She read him as solid. She read him as a man carrying something he wanted to put down. She was right about both. She was wrong about the only thing that mattered, which was what he had to lose. He came to her quarters at 2100 and sat on the edge of a chair with his forearms on his knees and told her in a voice that cracked twice that he had been the one holding the stopwatch, that the block had run long, that he had said something to Senior Chief Mercer about the time and been told to stand down, and that he had stood down. I stood down, he said. I want that written exactly like that. I didn't argue. I stood there with the watch running, and I watched the numbers go up, and I didn't say another word. You were a petty officer, 3rd class, talking to a senior chief. That's what I've been telling myself for 8 months, ma'am, and it stopped working around month 3. He wiped his face with the heel of his hand. I'll say it on record. Whatever room you need, I'll say all of it. She had him at 2140. By 10:50, the next morning she'd lost him. He came to find her on the training floor, and she knew before he opened his mouth, she knew from the way he was holding his shoulders, from the fact that he'd chosen a public space, so she couldn't press him. I'm withdrawing, he said. Isaac. Ma'am, I need you to not ask me why. His voice was steady in the way a hand is steady when somebody is gripping something very hard. Please, I'm asking you as a favor. Don't ask me why I'm. She looked at him for a long moment, and she did the thing she had promised herself 24 hours earlier she would not do again, which was read a man correctly and act on it anyway. Your mother, she said quietly. Mwangi's face didn't move. That was the answer. He'd listed his mother as his dependent on his TRICARE enrollment 11 months ago. Stage 3 something, Elise didn't know what, And it did not matter because the only relevant fact was that a man in an administrative billet with access to enrollment records had done exactly what a man in an administrative billet with access to enrollment records does. He hadn't threatened anything. He wouldn't have had to. He'd have said something warm and reasonable in a corridor about how complicated benefits continuation gets during an adverse administrative action and how much he hoped Isaac's mother was doing better. Okay, Elise said. Mwangi blinked. Okay, okay. She kept her voice absolutely even. You're withdrawn. It's your right, and I'm not going to spend 1 second making you feel worse about it than you already do. His face came apart then just for a second, and then he got it back. Ma'am, I'm sorry. Petty officer. She stepped closer and she said the next part low because it was for him and not for the room. Listen to me. What just happened to you is not a character flaw. It's the mechanism. It's the whole machine working exactly the way it was built to work. Somebody found the most expensive thing in your life and put a price on the truth, and you paid attention to the price. That's not weakness. That's a man doing math on behalf of his mother. He couldn't answer. But I want you to hear the other half, she said. The reason that machine has run for 14 months is that it only ever has to beat one person at a time. It's very good at one person. It has never once had to beat 11. She let him go. Then she went and stood in the equipment cage by herself with her hands on a steel rack for about 40 seconds, and Titan pushed his head under her arm, and she said out loud to no one, "That's on me." Because it was, she'd approached him at 2100 without knowing his dependent status, without checking, without slowing down. She'd handed Ferraro a name. She had cost a man something that morning, and she filed it, and she carried it, and it did not leave her for the rest of the week. Kane broke protocol at 1340 that afternoon, and she almost let it go because she had a lot in front of her, and this was small. She didn't let it go because small was how the whole thing worked. Close quarters clearing, 12 pairs cycling, through the simulated structure, submunition rounds, full contact. Kane cleared a room ahead of his partner, identified a role player, and fired twice before Dean had reached the threshold. Clean shots, technically excellent, and a direct violation of the synchronized entry protocol she had briefed by name at 0600 that morning. Cease. Kane walked me through that entry. He stepped out with his weapon down and the expression of a man preparing to explain why the rule didn't apply to him. Target was hostile. Waiting for partner entry creates exposure. The protocol exists because at entry speed, your partner's silhouette in that doorway is indistinguishable from the target's. Her voice didn't rise. You fired without confirmation of partner position. In a live scenario, you just killed Dean. In a live scenario, waiting kills me. In a live scenario, the protocol keeps you both alive. That's why it exists. She took one step closer, not aggressive, just precise. Senior Chief, this is the third time in 3 days that your first instinct has been to reduce a human being to a variable you can afford to lose. Boone in the water, Dean in that doorway. She paused. So I'm going to ask you something directly, and I want you to actually think before you answer it. When did you stop being part of a unit and start being a one-man operation with support staff? The floor stopped moving. 48 people dead still. Kane's face went through 3 distinct things in about 4 seconds. The first was heat immediate, the thing that lived just under his skin and had answered every challenge he'd had for a decade. The second was calculation, witnesses, cameras, documentation. The third was older and much less clean, and it looked briefly like recognition. I have kept every man in my unit alive through 5 deployments, he said. Yes, Elise said. And across those same 5 deployments, you taught every person around you that their value was conditional on what they could do for your objective. Both of those things are true at once. That's what makes you dangerous, Senior Chief. Not that you're incompetent. You're not. It's that you're good and you built something around yourself that nobody could question, and then nobody questioned it for 11 years. He didn't answer. Reset the scenario, she said. We run it clean. He stood there for a beat with the pistol at his thigh and something working behind his eyes that nobody in that building had ever seen working there before. Then he reset. He didn't speak to her again for 2 days. The storm came in 11 hours ahead of forecast. She was reviewing the utility logs at 1912 Thursday when the pressure drop hit and the building started making the low sounds that Kodiak buildings make, and her phone lit with this small craft advisory, then the gale warning, then the notification that the 0600 ferry was canceled and the airfield was closed to all rotary wing traffic for a minimum of 72 hours. 14 minutes later, Sorensen's message came through, and it came through garbled, which meant the satellite link was already degrading. Story dropped 1840 EST. Military outlet. Headline: Marine officer used false identity to provoke assault, SEALs allege. Two named sources. They have your photo, the one from the mat, the blood. They're running it as evidence you staged it. Elise, they're not describing an investigation. They're describing a woman with a grudge. I've requested a hold. I don't think I'll get it. Answer if you can. She read it twice. Then the link dropped, and the second read of that message was the last outside communication that reached Cold Weather Special. Warfare Detachment, Kodiak for 4 days. She sat there in the quiet with the wind starting to build against the hull of the building and did the thing she always did, which was take the situation apart and set the pieces where she could see them. She had no comms, no counsel, no extract. A published story that framed her as the aggressor seen by every person in her chain of command, and within about 18 hours by every person on this island who could get a signal. Her strongest witness had withdrawn under pressure. Her documentation was solid but incomplete, and the one thing that would make it complete was sitting behind a padlock in the North Passage that she could not legally cut without a witness and a camera and an authority she currently could not reach. And she had 4 days locked in a building with the 3 men who had just tried to end her career. She put her hand down and found Titan's head without looking. Okay, she said, okay. At 22:05, the knock came. Titan's head came up 9 seconds before it did the same 9 seconds. The same low sound cut off in his chest, and she was already standing when the knuckles hit the door, and she had already decided how she was going to open it. It was Silas Boone. 21 years old, 158 pounds, soaking wet. 6 weeks from a washout board, the kid whose name Bishop Kane had never once said correctly in a formation address, not through carelessness, she'd realized on day 2, but deliberately, because the denial of a name is the cheapest available way to tell a young man exactly what he's worth. I was standing in that passage with his hands jammed in his pockets and his shoulders up around his ears and his face the color of the deck plate. Petty officer. Ma'am, his voice cracked on the second syllable. He tried again. Ma'am, I've been trying to decide for 3 days, and I read the thing, the article. Everybody's reading it. I know. They're going to make you the bad guy. He said it fast, all in one breath, like he'd been holding it since 1840. They're going to make you the bad guy, and then you're going to leave. And everybody who talked to you is going to still be here, and it's going to be worse than before. That's a real possibility, Elise said. I'm not going to lie to you about it. Boone made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. Everybody keeps lying to me about it, he said. That's the first time anybody in this building said the true version out loud. He looked down the passage both ways. Then he pulled his right hand out of his pocket. He was holding a phone, an old one, cracked across the corner, the case swollen and warped the way plastic goes when it's been submerged and dried and submerged again, salt-crusted white in the charging port. This was in the gear cage, he said, in a bin of unclaimed stuff under a bunch of dead headlamps. I found it in September when I was doing inventory punishment. He was shaking now and not from the cold. I know whose it is. His girlfriend's name is on the lock screen when it powers up. Elise did not move. Petty Officer Boone, she said very carefully, why did you keep it? Because I didn't know who to give it to. His eyes came up and they were wet and furious. Ma'am, I was 19 when I got here. 19. And everybody I could have given it to was one of them. He held it out. She took it, and it weighed almost nothing, and it was the heaviest thing anyone had put in her hands in 6 years. Does it work? It charged. Boone swallowed. It charged, and I got it to the lock screen, and then I turned it off, and I put it in my foot locker, and I didn't touch it again for 5 months because I figured out that if I looked at what was on it, I'd have to do something about it. He wiped his face with his sleeve, fast angry at himself. So I'm doing something about it, he said. That's all. That's the whole thing. I'm doing something about it. Elise closed her hand around the phone. Behind her, low Titan rose off the deck and came to stand at her knee, and his ears were forward, and his eyes were on the passage over Boone's shoulder, down toward the north end, where the lockers were, where the corridor camera sat, where a padlock had been rusting on a dead man's name for 8 months. And under the sound of the storm coming across the island, both of them heard it at the same time. Footsteps in the North Passage. Somebody was already down there. For the first 90 seconds, it was almost nothing. Water. Distortion, men's voices at the wrong end of a room. 106 people sat in that assembly space and strained toward a cracked phone on a podium and heard what sounded like every training block any of them had ever stood in. And Elise watched the faces in the front rows go from braced to confused because they had prepared themselves for an accusation, and what they were getting was ambient noise. That was exactly why she played it. She needed them to lean in before it started. At 1 minute 40, a voice came up close to the microphone, young, out of breath, half laughing, and said the thing about his sister, about being cold, about her thinking he was out here getting a tan, and the room did not react at all because they didn't know yet whose voice it was. Then somebody in the fifth row said, "Oh God." Not loud, it just came out of him. It was a petty officer named Ruiz who had shared a barracks room with Danny Core for 5 months, and he had recognized the laugh and the sound he made went through that assembly space like a crack running across ice. After that, everybody knew. Elise saw the exact instant it landed on each section of the room. Row by row, faces changing. A man in the third row put a hand over his mouth. Somebody near the back stood up, realized there was nowhere to go, and sat back down. At 3 minutes and 6 seconds, Isaac Mwangi's voice said, "Senior Chief, that's 11 minutes. And Isaac Mwangi, sitting in the 11th row of that assembly space with his hands flat on his thighs, made it sound like he'd been hit. "Did I ask you for a time, no, Senior Chief?" Every head in that room turned toward Wade Mercer. "Then don't give me one. Senior Chief, that's over the immersion limit for this water temp. Stand down, Mwangi." 3 seconds of nothing. Water, wind against a pool house roof. "Standing down, Senior Chief." Mercer was on his feet. "That's edited," he said. That audio's been cut. You can hear the "sit down, Senior Chief." That's a doctored file, and she's playing it to a room of "sit down." It was not Elise who said it. It was Micah Dean, 23 years old, third row on his feet, with his fists at his sides and his whole body shaking. And the sound that came out of him was not a request, and it was not anything a petty officer says to a senior chief in front of 100 people. Mercer turned on him and found that 4 other men in Dean's row had stood up too. He sat down. The recording kept running. And at 3 minutes and 40 seconds, a voice came in from farther away, level, unhurried, entirely calm, and said, "How long? 11, 12. Give them 10 more. They'll remember it." The room did not gasp. It did something worse. It went absolutely silent, 106 people, and every single one of them turned around and looked at the back row. Bishop Kane was sitting there by himself, and he did not look away from the podium, and he did not put his head down, and he let 105 people look at him for the 29 seconds it took the recording to end. Then the file stopped, and the room stayed exactly as it was, and nobody moved for what felt like a very long time. Elise let it run 11 seconds. She had counted it out in her quarters at 0400, and she counted it again now because there is a length of silence past which a room stops waiting for the speaker and starts talking to itself. Then she leaned into the microphone. "The training log for that night recorded an immersion time of 11 minutes, she said. "The facility generator record shows the pool house lighting circuit drawing continuously for 49 minutes past the logged end of that block. Corporal Core's death certificate reads hypothermia, individual negligence, contributory." She paused. There was no individual negligence. There was a senior chief who wouldn't take a time from a third class, a senior chief who told him to give them 10 more, and an administrative officer who turned 49 minutes into 11 with a keyboard. She looked out at them. That's the whole thing. That's what took 14 months and 1 dead Marine and a phone and a bin of dead headlamps. Ferraro stood up. He did it smoothly, and when he spoke, his voice was reasonable and warm and pitched to Carrie, and Elise thought, there it is. There's the real one. Captain Kovar has now played this room an audio file of unknown provenance, unauthenticated, recovered by her, personally chain of custody, unestablished. He turned slightly so he was addressing the room and not the podium. She has also in the last 24 hours become the subject of a supplemental incident report regarding the death of Petty Officer Lang. I would gently suggest that a woman under investigation playing her own evidence to a mustered command before any board has seen it is not a search for truth. It's a performance. He'd have won that on any other morning in any other room that would have worked. It was clean, and it was calm, and it gave every uncomfortable person present a door to walk out of. Elise didn't answer him. She said, "Commander Prentice." And a 54-year-old Navy doctor stood up in the second row. Ferraro's head turned. It was the first time in 4 days that Elise had seen the man's face do something he hadn't chosen for it. "Halvard," he said quietly, "sit down." "No," Prentice said. His voice was terrible. It had nothing in it. He walked to the front of the room and he did not go to the podium. He just stood at the base of it with his back to Elise and faced the command he'd served for 22 years. "I signed Corporal Corps' death certificate," he said. "I wrote individual negligence on it. He came into my bay with fixed pupils in a core temperature of 26 degrees, and there was nothing negligent about it except everything that happened to him before he got to me." He stopped, started again. "Chief Warrant Officer Ferraro stood at the end of my bay that night, and he said, 'Commander, we're all going to want the record to be simple on this one.' And I made it simple." The silence in that room changed texture. "Yesterday morning, I co-signed a medical opinion saying Captain Kovar's decisions contributed to the death of Petty Officer Lang." Prentice's voice finally cracked. "That opinion is false. I wrote it because I was asked to write it by the same man in the same tone of voice, and because I have been afraid of him for 8 months, and because a coward develops a very good memory for what it costs to say no." He turned his head slightly. "I'm withdrawing it. I'll surrender my license if a board takes it. I should have done this on June 15th. He walked back to his seat and sat down and put both hands over his face and did not take them away for a long time. Elise waited 3 seconds. "Petty Officer Beltran." Nora Beltran stood. She had not spoken in a formation setting since month 2. She stood up in that room with her chin level and her hands at her sides, and she said in a voice that shook on the first word and then stopped shaking, "Chief Warrant Officer Ferraro told me in the North Passage that filing a complaint would follow me for the rest of my career. He was calm about it. He was professional. He did not threaten me one time." She swallowed. "I want to say clearly that he never once said anything that would sound bad if you wrote it down. That's the part I could never explain to anybody. There was nothing to report. There was just a man being reasonable at me until I understood what would happen." Somebody 2 rows behind her stood up. Elise didn't know his name. She looked at her list later and found him a machinist's mate 29 who had never been in a single one of her files. "Same conversation," he said. "October, same passage." Another one stood over by the wall. "March." And then Silas Boone stood up in the very back, 21 years old, 6 weeks from a washout board, and his voice cracked in half, and he kept going anyway. "I found that phone in the gear cage in September, and I kept it in my footlocker for 5 months because I was scared." He was crying, and he wasn't stopping. "Senior Chief Kane has never said my name right one time since I got here. Not once. And I used to think that was just how it is. And I gave that phone to the captain 3 nights ago, and somebody cut the lock off Danny's locker 4 hours later and emptied it, and I've been waiting 3 days to find out if that was because of me." Elise leaned into the microphone. "It wasn't," she said. "It was because somebody was already watching that locker and had been for 8 months and moved the second I asked about it." Petty Officer Boone, look at me. "You are the reason this command knows what happened to Daniel Corr, not me. You." Boone sat down hard and put his forehead on the seat in front of him. And then Isaac Wangi stood up. "How was the last one?" And he was the one Elise had not asked for, and he was the one she had already written off with her own hands 3 days earlier. "I withdrew my statement," he said. "On Wednesday. I want that on the record before I say anything else. I gave the captain a full account. And then I took it back the next morning, and I took it back because Chief Warrant Officer Ferraro found me at breakfast and asked me how my mother was doing." Ferraro's face did not move. "He asked me how she was doing," Wangi said. "That's all he did. He asked me about my mother, and he mentioned that adverse administrative actions complicate dependent benefits continuation, and then he told me to have a good day." His breathing went ragged. "And I went and found the captain, and I told her I was out. And she said—" He stopped. He had to work to get it out. "She said it wasn't a character flaw. She said it was a man doing math on behalf of his mother." He wiped his face with the back of his wrist, hard, furious. "And then she said the machine only ever has to beat one person at a time, and it's very good at one person, and it's never had to beat 11. He looked around the room. He was not counting. He didn't have to. There were 14 people standing. That's my voice on that recording, Isaac Mwangi said. I'm the one who called the time. I'm the one who stood down. I've been hearing myself say standing down, senior chief, every night for 8 months. His chin came up. I'm reinstating my statement, all of it. Whatever it costs my family, I'll find another way to pay it because I'm not paying it with this anymore. That was when it broke. Not with shouting. Nobody shouted. People simply started standing up in ones and twos across that assembly space, without a word being said until there were more of them on their feet than in their chairs. And the terrible thing, the thing that finished Doyle Ferraro, was that most of the people standing weren't witnesses to anything. They were just men and women who had spent between 6 months and 4 years on that island, learning to keep their heads down, and who had abruptly stopped being willing to. Ferraro looked around at it, and for 1 second, when the reasonable, warm, unhurried surface came off him and what was underneath was a 41-year-old man who had run a system for 14 months on the single assumption that it would never have to face more than one person at a time, watching that assumption die in front of him. He sat down. Captain Sorensen came to the podium. This detachment is now under formal investigation authority, she said. Chief Warrant Officer Ferraro, Senior Chief Mercer, Senior Chief Kane, you are relieved of all duties effective immediately pending JAG review. Commander Prentice, you are relieved and referred to medical board review. Everyone in this room is directed to preserve all records, correspondence, and personal notes as of this moment. She stepped back, and Bishop Kane stood up in the back row. Nobody had called on him. Every head in that room turned, and 100 people watched him walk down the center aisle, and Elise watched 100 people brace for him to fight. He didn't stop at the podium. He stopped at the base of it and turned to face the room, and he didn't take the microphone because he didn't need one, and because taking it would have been a performance, and he had run out of those. I said give them 10 more, he said. That's my voice. It's not edited. I said it, and I walked out of the pool house, and I went to bed. Nobody breathed. Ferraro wrote 11 minutes, and I read that report, and I knew the number was wrong, and I signed the endorsement block anyway, because a clean report meant nobody asked me anything. His jaw was working. So when they come for the piece where I said 10 more, I want it on the record that that's not the worst thing I did. The worst thing I did was read a lie about a dead kid and put my name under it. He reached up and took the rank insignia off his collar. Not dramatically. He fumbled it. Actually, his hands were still bad from the water, and he had to work at it for 4 or 5 seconds with the whole room watching, and somehow that was worse than if he'd torn it off. He set it on the edge of the podium. Then he turned and looked at Elise, and this was the part that would be in the transcript, and the part that would be in every article, and the part that Silas Boone would still be describing to people 15 years later. Captain, he said, yesterday you had me on a floor with a core temp of 31 degrees and no lawyer and no rights advisement, and I handed you the whole thing, and you told me to stop talking. His voice went rough. I've been trying since then to figure out why, and the only answer I've got is that you actually meant the thing you said on day one, about what gets a team killed. He shook his head slowly. I've been in this Navy 11 years. You're the first person who ever had me dead to rights and didn't take it. Elise did not answer him. Not there, not in front of them. She reached down and put her hand flat on Titan's head for 1 second and took it away. Muster's dismissed, she said. The JAG proceedings ran 51 days. Elise was present for 14 of them and spent the other 37 doing something else entirely, which she'd say later was the only reason she survived the 14. Ferraro fought everything. He fought the admissibility of the recording. He fought the chain of custody on the phone Boone on the stand for 2 hours and 11 minutes at 21 years old, being asked 40 different ways whether he was certain he hadn't altered a file he'd been too afraid to open. He fought the generator log. He fought the utility metering standard itself, arguing that a circuit draw could not establish human presence, which was true, and which also required him to explain who else had been running pool house lighting for 49 minutes at 2100 on a Tuesday. And on day 19, his counsel went after Elise directly, and they went after the one thing she had never told anyone. Captain Kovar, in 2019, you were assigned to a training unit at Camp Lejeune. Is that correct? Yes. And a 19-year-old private in your platoon took his own life in November of that year. The room got very still. Yes, Elise said. Prior to his death, that private was the subject of sustained hazing by 4 senior members of that unit. Correct? Correct. Were you aware of it? Yes. Did you report it? Elise looked at the man asking. Then she looked past him at Priya Kaur, 19 years old, sitting in the third row of the gallery, where she had sat every single day of the proceedings. No, she said, I did not report it. You witnessed the systematic degradation of a subordinate Marine and you said nothing. That's correct. Then I'd suggest to this board that Captain Kovar's conduct at Kodiak was not an evaluation. It was a personal. It was, Elise said. The counsel stopped. I'm sorry. You're about to say it was personal. She sat forward. You're right, it was. I was 19 years old and I watched 4 men take a kid apart over 4 months. And I told myself it wasn't my business. And I told myself somebody more senior would handle it. And I told myself he seemed like he was managing. Her voice stayed level and it cost her everything she had. He wasn't managing. He hanged himself in a stairwell on the 11th of November, and I have thought about him every single day for 6 years and 8 months. Nobody in that room moved. So yes, sir, it was personal, Elise said. I've spent 6 years building myself into the person who would have said something. And when the Secretary of the Navy needed somebody to walk into a building where a 22-year-old had died, and everybody had agreed to call it negligence, it turns out that a person like that is exactly who you send. She looked at the board. Counsel is going to tell you my motive taints the evidence. It doesn't. The generator log doesn't care why I pulled it. Corporal Kaur's voice doesn't care why I found the phone. 14 people stood up in that assembly space, and not one of them stood up for me. They'd known me 9 days. They stood up because they'd all been waiting for somebody else to go first. She sat back. That's the only thing I ever actually did at Kodiak, she said. I went first. The board recessed for 11 minutes. Priya Kaur was waiting in the passage when Elise came out, and she did not say anything at all. She just walked up and put her arms around a Marine Corps captain she had met 9 days earlier and held on, and Elise stood there with her chin on top of a 19-year-old's head and did not cry because she had decided a long time ago that she was not going to do that where anyone could see it. Wade Mercer took a plea on day 28. Reduction in grade to E5 forfeiture, dishonorable discharge in 18 months confinement. His written statement ran 3 paragraphs, and the first 2 were his lawyers. The third one wasn't. In 2011, Senior Chief Kane pulled me out of a collapsed structure in Kandahar. For 14 years, I believed that meant I owed him my silence. On the night of 14 June, I was given a time by a third-class petty officer who was correct, and I told him to stand down because I did not want to be corrected in front of junior personnel by a man 11 years younger than me. That is the actual reason. There is no better one. Corporal Kaur died because a senior chief petty officer's pride was worth more to him in that moment than a boy's core temperature. I understand now that what I owed Senior Chief Kane was never my silence. It was the truth, and I owed it to him first. Elise read that paragraph twice, put it down, and went for a run. Doyle Ferraro did not take a plea. He went to a board on day 44, and he contested all 15 specifications, and he performed for 2 days the full architecture of a man who had decided that if he was going down, he was going down constructing something. The board found against him on 12. His career ended on a Thursday afternoon at 1540, with the flat administrative efficiency of a system processing, exactly the outcome it had been designed to produce. And the thing Elise remembered about it wasn't his face. It was that he stood up, straightened his jacket, and thanked the board members individually by name. Even then, even at the end. Sorensen texted her the result. Elise read it, sat with it for about 30 seconds, typed back thank you, and went back to the document she was building. Bishop Kane's board came on day 50. He offered no defense. He entered a plea of guilty to every specification against him, declined to make a personal statement in mitigation, and when the board president asked whether there was anything he wished the members to consider, he said, "No, sir, there isn't." I was reduced to E4, forfeited all pay, and separated under other than honorable conditions. I was not confined. The board deliberated on that for 4 hours, and the entire difference, was a 2-page memorandum submitted by Captain Elise Kovar, USMC, which stated in language considerably drier than anything she had said out loud on that island, that the accused had provided a full and unsolicited admission at a point when he had reason to believe no admission was required of him, and that the government's case as constructed had not depended on it. She was asked afterward by a JAG lieutenant colonel in a quarter why she'd written it. Because it's true, Elise said. Ma'am, with respect, that man put your face into a mat. Yes, he did. She shouldered her bag, and 9 days later, he went into 3-degree water for 4 kids who'd have died without him. And 11 hours after that, he told me the truth when he could have said nothing at all. She looked at the colonel. Sir, I'm not asking anybody to forgive him. I'm not sure I have. But if this command decides that a man who tells the truth against himself gets the exact same outcome as a man who fights it for 2 days, then every single person watching learns the wrong lesson, and I did not spend 21 days on that island to teach it. Sire. On the last day of the proceedings, Priya Kaur stood in a parking lot in Bremerton with a cardboard box in her hands. Danny's phone was in it. The Navy had made a forensic image and returned the original, which nobody had expected, and which had required Elise to file 3 separate requests and 1 memorandum with tone in it. There was one other thing in the box. A tactical harness, black webbing, gone gray at the edges from salt with KOR KZO4 embroidered on the left panel. Danny had been a dog handler. That was the part that hadn't been in any file Elise had pulled in her first week because it had been in a section of his record that nobody had updated after June. The dog he'd handled had been retired 11 months before he died and had gone to a family in Modesto. Priya had never been told. Nobody said. She was looking down into the box. Nobody said anything about anything. I wrote 11 letters. I know. You know what the worst part is? Priya's voice went thin. It's not that they lied. It's that I believed it. For 8 months, I thought my brother made a stupid mistake in the water because he was tired or because he didn't listen, and I was angry at him. She pressed the heel of her hand against her eyes. I was so angry at him, Captain. I was angry at my dead brother for 8 months because somebody typed a number wrong on purpose. Elise didn't say anything for a moment. Then she crouched down and Titan came forward without being asked and put his head against Priya Kaur's leg and stayed there. Priya's hand came down onto his ruff and stopped shaking. He does that, Elise said quietly. He picks. I've never once been able to figure out how. Was he Danny's? No, he's mine. Elise stood back up. But your brother recorded 4 minutes and 12 seconds because he wanted somebody to be able to hear how they talked to him if anything happened. Priya, do you understand what that means? He didn't do that for himself. He knew he couldn't fix it. He did it for whoever came next. Priya looked up. There are 300 people on Kodiak right now, Elise said, who are going to go through a training pipeline that got rebuilt from the ground up because of 4 minutes of your brother's voice. That's not a consolation. I'm not offering it to you as one. It's just a fact, and you're entitled to it. Priya Kaur stood in that parking lot with her hand in a dog's ruff and a dead man's harness in a cardboard box. Can I tell you what he'd say, she said. If he could see all this, please. He'd say, told you. She laughed wet and cracking. He'd be so smug. He'd be unbearable. Good, Elise said. He earned it. Rear Admiral Elias Grady called her to his office 9 days after the proceedings closed. He was 61, 32 years in, and he stood up when she came in and sat down across from her, instead of behind the desk, which told her everything about what kind of conversation it was going to be. He looked at her face for a moment, the lip fully healed, now no mark at all, and then at her eyes. What I'm going to tell you doesn't leave this room until I clear it, he said. Understood. Yes, sir. We knew something was wrong at Kodiak 11 months before I sent you. Elise went very still. 3 separate service members came forward through channels, Grady said. Their accounts were consistent and credible. 2 withdrew before formal proceedings. The 3rd was transferred to a different command, and her complaint was reclassified as a personnel matter rather than a command culture issue. His hands were flat on his knees. Every attempt we made to investigate from inside the structure got absorbed by the structure because the people we needed to investigate were the same people who controlled access to the evidence. So we waited, and while we waited, Corporal Daniel Kaur went into the water. He looked at her without flinching from it. That failure is mine, Captain. Not Kane's, not Ferraro's, mine. I knew and I could not build the case fast enough, and a 22-year-old died in the 11 months it took me to decide to do something as far outside the box as sending you. Elise didn't answer right away. What happens to those 3, sir? Full record review. Retroactive removal of every adverse entry connected to what they filed. Letters of acknowledgement from this command signed by me in my own name. Grady's jaw tightened. It doesn't give them back the time. It puts the truth in the record. That's all I've got. That's not nothing, sir. It's not enough. No, sir, Elise agreed. It isn't. Grady almost smiled. Then he reached over to the desk and slid a folder across the space between them. She opened it and read the first page and did not say anything for a while. Director Training Standards and Ethics, Naval Special Warfare Command. Full staff. Direct access to Grady's office. Authority to design, implement, and audit evaluation methodology across every training pipeline under the command. 11 schoolhouses, 4,000 candidates a year. Sir, she said, I'm 25. I'm aware of your age. With respect, there are captains in this command with 12 years on me who've never been given a fraction of this. Also aware, Grady leaned back. Captain, I have spent 32 years watching this institution promote people because they'd been here a long time. It's produced some outstanding officers, and it produced Doyle Ferraro, who was a chief warrant officer with an unblemished record in 18 years of service, and who I would not now trust to run a parking lot. His eyes didn't move off her. 11 months of institutional effort failed to crack that detachment. You did it in 9 days with a dog and a stopwatch. Age is a data point. It is not the deciding one. Elise looked back down at the folder. She thought about a 19-year-old private in a stairwell at Camp Lejeune. She thought about Nora Beltran on a bench with a harness in her hands, saying he wasn't wrong about the practical outcome, he was just wrong about whether that made it acceptable. She thought about Isaac Mwangi standing up in an assembly space and reinstating a statement that could have cost his mother her benefits. There's a condition, sir. Grady's eyebrows went up about a millimeter. You're negotiating. Yes, sir. Go ahead. Whatever I build has to be able to survive me leaving. She closed the folder. The reason Kodiak happened is that everything in that building depended on who was standing in the room. Kane's authority. Ferraro's leverage. Prentice's fear. Change the people and the whole thing collapses, which is convenient right now because we changed the people and it collapsed. But it means the next Ferraro just has to wait until I'm reassigned. She met his eyes. I don't want a program that works because I'm running it. I want one that works when the person running it is somebody I've never met and wouldn't like. Grady was quiet for a moment. That's the correct answer, he said. That's the answer I was hoping for and did not expect to get today. Then I'll take the assignment, sir. Good, he stood. Get some sleep first. You look like hell, and the next 4 months are going to be longer than the last 2. She got to the door before she stopped. Sir, the candidate's still in the pipeline at Kodiak. Dean Beltran, Boone Mwangi. She turned around. Every evaluation they have received in the last 14 months was written by, endorsed by, or processed through the 3 men who just lost their careers. Those assessments aren't reliable. Some of them aren't even honest. Already flagged. Full independent reevaluation begins in 3 weeks. Sir, that's not what I'm asking. Grady waited. Boone is 6 weeks from a washout board, Elise said. That board was recommended by Bishop Kane in December on the strength of an assessment that used the phrase lacks moral courage. She let that sit in the room for a second. Sir, that kid kept a dead man's phone in his footlocker for 5 months, and then he handed it to a woman he had known 3 days in the middle of a storm, knowing exactly what it would cost him if she turned out to be one of them. And 4 hours later, somebody cut a padlock off a locker because of it, and he spent 3 days believing that was on him, and he didn't take it back. She stopped. Lacks moral courage, and she said, make sure the reevaluation sees what I saw. And what did you see, Captain? Somebody who tells the truth when it costs him everything and buys him nothing. Her voice was flat. Sir, in this community, that is the single rarest quality there is, and we have built an entire assessment architecture that is functionally blind to it. Grady held her gaze for a long moment. Noted, he said. She spent the next 4 months in a windowless office in Coronado building a thing nobody had asked for, and half the command actively did not want. 16-hour days. She ate at her desk. She slept badly and got up at 0500 anyway, and ran, and Titan ran with her. And on the mornings when the whole thing felt impossible, he was the reason she got out the door, because a dog does not care about institutional inertia, and will absolutely stand on your chest at 0455 regardless of your workload. The resistance came fast and it came polite. A captain at the amphibious schoolhouse who spent 40 minutes explaining warmly that character was not a measurable variable and that any attempt to score it would collapse into subjectivity within one cycle. A master chief who told her not unkindly that he'd been running pipelines since before she was in high school and that the reason the standards were physical was that physical standards couldn't be argued with. A senior staff officer who said the phrase social engineering twice in one meeting and clearly thought it was devastating. She lost some of those arguments. She won most of them. She won them because she did not argue. She brought the Kodiak data. She had 14 months of it, and she had put it into a form that could not be dismissed, 19 separations in 24 months, 14 of them carrying an adverse entry authored by the same three-man cluster, within 60 days of departure, 9 with no prior negative mark in their entire service records. She had the generator log, she had the utility metering, she had a 4-minute audio file that she never once played in those meetings because she decided in month 1 that she was not going to use a dead kid's voice as a rhetorical device in front of people who hadn't earned it. She had one more thing, and it was the thing that actually won. She had the after-action reevaluation results from Kodiak. Because when independent assessors came in and rescored that entire intake, with no access to the old files, 4 candidates whose records had them marked for separation came out in the top quintile, and 2 candidates whom Kane's assessments had described as high potential and natural leaders came out flagged for peer conduct review. She put those 2 lists side by side on one page and passed it around a conference table in a room full of officers who had spent an hour telling her character was unmeasurable, sat looking at documentary proof that they had already been measuring it badly, subjectively, and in the direction of whoever was loudest. Gentlemen, Elise said, I'm not asking you to add a new variable. I'm telling you that you've been scoring it for 30 years without a rubric, without an audit trail, and without a single control on who does the scoring. That was the meeting where it turned. She went back to Kodiak in June. She had told herself it was a site inspection. It was not a site inspection. She had done the last of the pipeline audits in April, and there was no operational reason on earth for the Director of Training Standards and Ethics to spend 2 days on that island in Vivian Sorensen. Now the detachment's commanding officer did not ask her about it once, which was its own kind of kindness. Micah Dean found her standing at the edge of the training floor. I was in instructor gear now. The reevaluation had come back 3 weeks earlier and had come back the way she told Grady to make sure it came back, and he had a temporary instructor billet while his next set of orders processed. He stopped a few feet away and looked at the mat with her. Weird being back? No, she said. Necessary. He nodded. They stood there a while. Boone passed, he said. Top decile. They pulled the washout board in April. He's on a leadership track now, which, ma'am, I don't think you understand how funny that is to everybody who was here in February. I have some idea. Beltran deployed 6 weeks ago. She asked me to tell you something if you ever came back. He paused. She said to tell you she's not scared anymore. She said you'd know what that meant. Elise did know. She thought about a 24-year-old woman on a bench in an equipment room, stripping and reassembling a harness with her hands to stay ahead of a feeling, saying, I filed 1 complaint. In month 2, nothing happened in the flat. Controlled voice of somebody who had learned very thoroughly that showing anything had never once been safe. Tell her that's not it, Elise said. Dean blinked. Ma'am, when you write to her, tell her it was never about not being scared. Her voice was quiet. I was scared every single day I was on this island. I was scared on that mat before he grabbed me. I was scared in that water, and I was scared at that podium with 106 people staring at me and a phone that might not have played. She looked at him. Being scared isn't the problem. Being scared and doing it anyway, that's the whole thing. That's all courage has ever been. Anybody who tells her otherwise is selling something. Dean was quiet for a second. Ma'am, can I ask you something I've been sitting on for 4 months? Go ahead. Kane. Elise didn't say anything. He's still here. Dean watched her face. You know that, right? Separated, no rank, no billet. He works maintenance on the north side under a civilian contract that Captain Sorensen approved, and about 40 people wrote letters against. He's at the conditioning yard at 0600 every morning, running the block with the new intake like he's a first-week trainee. He doesn't explain himself to anybody. He doesn't complain. He doesn't talk about the case. Dean's jaw worked. Some people think you should have pushed for confinement. Full stop, no path back, nothing. I know they do. I'm not one of them, Dean said. But ma'am, I want to understand it because Toby Lang is dead and Danny Core is dead, and that man said give them 10 more and I can't square it. Elise looked at the mat for a long moment. You're not supposed to square it, she said. There's nothing to square. 2 men are dead and nothing that happens to Bishop Kane for the rest of his life makes that even. That equation doesn't balance and it's never going to. Then why? Because punishing him was never the objective. She turned to face Dean fully. Petty officer, if the goal was to remove Bishop Kane, I could have done that in 90 minutes on day 1 with the assault charge and gone home. Article 128. Witnesses everywhere. It would have been the easiest case of my career, and it would have accomplished absolutely nothing. Because the culture that made him would have still been in this building on Wednesday morning, looking for somebody to promote into the vacancy. Dean said nothing. Removing one man removes one instance of a problem, Elise said. It leaves every condition that produced him completely intact. That's not justice, that's housekeeping. So what is it then, him out there at 0600? It's evidence. Dean looked at her. Every new candidate who comes through that gate walks past a former senior chief petty officer with no rank on his collar, doing basic conditioning alongside kids 12 years younger than him, Elise said. Nobody has to explain what that means. There's no brief, there's no policy memo, they just see it. And what they see is that accountability in this command is real, that it reaches the top, that it reached the most decorated man on this island, and that it did not stop at the point where it got inconvenient. She paused. You cannot teach that, you can only show it. And if he's faking it, then I'll know. Her voice went hard. Because that's the other half of this, and I want you to hear it clearly. That man is not being forgiven. Nobody forgave him. What he's got is a very long, very public, entirely conditional opportunity to demonstrate something, and he is doing it in front of the exact population that has the most reason to watch him for a slip. She looked back at the floor. If he stops showing up, everybody sees it. If he starts trading on who he used to be, everybody sees it. He doesn't get a fresh start. He gets an audience. Dean let out a slow breath. That's colder than I expected, ma'am. Yes, Elise said. It is. She passed the conditioning yard on her way to the pier, and she did not intend to stop. Kane was in the middle of a group of 20 new intake candidates. No insignia, running the same drill at the same pace, and one of them, a kid who looked about 19, was fighting a technique and losing badly to it. Kane stopped. I didn't shout. He didn't demonstrate the correction in the way instructors demonstrate corrections when there's an audience. He got down on one knee beside a 19-year-old, put 2 fingers on the kid's elbow, moved it about 4 inches and said something Elise was much too far away to hear. The kid tried it again. It worked. And the unguarded, uncomplicated grin that went across that 19-year-old's face was matched by something equally unguarded on the face of a man who in February had put a woman's face into a mat because she didn't flinch. Elise stood there for 11 seconds. Then she walked on and she did not stop, and Titan came off her knee without a command and matched her stride the whole way down. She would think later that the most honest thing she did on that entire trip was keep walking. Tospan. The first full cohort under the new framework mustered in September. 46 candidates in room in Coronado, mixed rank, mixed background, the whole slow, imperfect demographic reality of what naval special warfare was becoming, and Elise stood at that podium in service uniform with a folder she did not open. My name is Captain Elise Kovar, she said. I'm the Director of Training Standards and Ethics for this command. Some of you have read about what happened at Kodiak. Some of you have opinions about it that you haven't decided whether to say out loud yet. She let that land. Keep the opinions. Test them against what you experience over the next 21 days. Change them if the evidence requires it. That's what good operators do, and it's the entire reason this program exists. She came out from behind the podium. This pipeline evaluates one thing above everything else it evaluates. Not whether you're fast, not whether you're strong. Everybody in this room is already fast and strong, or you would not be sitting in it. She walked the front row slowly. It evaluates who you are at the moment when being who you claim to be actually costs you something. Not in a classroom, not in a scenario with safety parameters and a whistle. In the real moments when your team needs you to be exactly the person you told them you were, and being that person is expensive. She stopped. I'll tell you what I've learned in the last 11 months, and then I'll get out of your way. Every serious failure of character I have ever investigated had the same structure. It was never one villain. It was one person willing to do the wrong thing, and 11 people who saw it and calculated that the cost of speaking was higher than the piece of staying quiet. Her voice stayed level. Those 11 people were not cowards. They had families and careers and student loans and mothers on TRICARE, and every single one of them did the math correctly. That's the part nobody wants to hear. The system was built so that staying quiet was the rational choice. 46 people dead silent. So we changed the math, Elise said. That's all this program is. Every reporting channel in this command now runs outside the chain that would be reporting on itself. Every adverse entry gets audited against separation patterns quarterly. Every assessment gets attributed permanently to the human being who wrote it. She looked at them. I can't make you brave. Nobody can. What I can do is make sure that when one of you decides to say something, you are not standing there alone with your whole career in your hands, wondering if anyone is going to stand up behind you. She picked up the forwarder. I'm not here to make you feel good about yourselves. I'm here to find out whether you are what you think you are. A pause. Most of you will be surprised by the answer. I was. Afterward, a 20-year-old petty officer waited while the room emptied and then came up to her with the specific nervous energy of somebody who has rehearsed an opening line 11 times. Ma'am, Captain Kovar. Petty officer. I read everything that was published about Kodiak, all of it, the whole transcript. They put it out on the public docket. He stopped, restarted. Ma'am, I have a sister. She's finishing assessment next month at a different pipeline. She's been told 3 separate times by 3 separate people that she doesn't belong there. Elise felt something move under her sternum. What's her name? Petty Officer 3rd Class Layla Okonjo, ma'am. Elise took out her phone and wrote it down. Not into a notes app, into her actual task list in the same place she put things she was accountable for. When she reports, she said, tell her my office is building 4 first door on the left and that she does not need an appointment and does not need to go through anybody. Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. And tell her something else. Elise looked up. Tell her exactly what you just told me. That you read it, that you know what happened at Kodiak was real. The kid frowned slightly. Ma'am, because the single most corrosive thing about what happened on that island wasn't Ferraro and it wasn't Kane, Elise said. It was that every person they did it to spent months believing they were the only one, and that nobody would ever believe them, and that maybe they were being oversensitive about a man who never once raised his voice. She held his eyes. Sometimes the most important thing a person can hear is that somebody else knows it was real. That's not a small thing. That might be the whole thing. He nodded, swallowed hard, and walked out with something in his face that was somewhere between relief and a decision. Jim. There were 3 more things, and they came within 11 days of each other, and Elise would remember that autumn for the rest of her life as the season when the ledger finally started closing. The first was a letter. It came through official channels from Commander Halvard Prentice. Retired, medically boarded out in July, and it was 1-page handwritten. And it said that he had begun testifying as a subject matter witness in 2 other command culture investigations at other installations without compensation at his own expense, and that he intended to keep doing it for as long as anyone would have him. The last line read, you told me in a corridor that you didn't think I had the shoulders. You were right. I'm building some. The second was a phone call from a JAG lieutenant colonel telling her that Isaac Mwangi's mother's benefits had been reviewed, confirmed, and backdated, and that the review had been initiated not by Elise's memorandum, but by Rear Admiral Grady personally in writing under his own signature on a Sunday. The third came at 2140 on a Tuesday in October, and it came from a number she didn't have saved. It was a photograph. A German Shepherd, not Titan, an older one, grayed heavily through the muzzle, 13 if he was a day lying on a porch in Modesto in the last of the afternoon light, with his head on a 19-year-old girl's foot. The message under it read, "His name is Rook. He was Danny's. The family in Modesto found me after the transcript went public. They drove him up to Fresno last weekend. Captain, he's deaf now, and he can barely get up the steps, and he slept for 14 hours the first night he was here. My mom says she hasn't heard the house that quiet since Danny was home. I thought you'd want to know that something came back." Elise read it 3 times. Then she got up and stood at the window of an office in Coronado and watched the last light go off the Pacific and did not do anything at all for about 2 minutes, which for her was a very long time. Titan came and leaned his whole weight against her leg the way he had on a mat in February with blood on her chin, and she put her hand down into his rough and held on. She thought about a 22-year-old kid on a pool deck in June hitting record on a cracked phone, not because he thought it would save him. He'd known it wouldn't, but because he wanted whoever came next to be able to hear it. She thought about a padlock on a locker for 8 months. She thought about 11 letters from Fresno that nobody answered. Then she picked up her phone and typed 4 words. "He's home. So's Danny." She hit send, set the phone face down, and sat back down at her desk. There was a folder there, a schoolhouse in Virginia, 3 separations in 5 months, all 3 with adverse entries, authored by the same instructor within 60 days, all 3 with clean records before that. It had come in that morning. It looked exactly, precisely, unmistakably like something she had seen before. Elise Kovar opened it and started reading. They had tried to end her by driving her face into a mat in front of 48 men because they believed that a woman who went down would stay down, and that a story with no witnesses was a story that never happened. They were wrong on every count. She got up with blood on her lip and told the most dangerous man in that building the truth before he even understood she was speaking it. And 21 days later, a dead Marine had his name back. 4 careers built on silence were finished, and a 19-year-old girl in Fresno finally knew that her brother had done nothing wrong. You do not get to grab the truth from behind. You do not get to drive it into the floor and stand over it and wait for it to stay down. It gets up. It always gets up. And on the morning it does, it knows exactly who you are.